What's up, guys? It's Andy Frisella.
This is Director X.
This is Amberly Lago.
This is Sina Sadaf.
Yo, this is Apathy of the Demigods.
This is Bradley and Michael Francis here.
This is Chris Voss.
Yo, this is Charlie Tuna.
This is Ryan Serhant.
This is James Harris.
Hey, this is Steve Sims.
Hey, what's up? It's Billy G.
And you are listening
to the RUN GPG Podcast.
Stop playing. Please stop.
Universally recognized for his mastery of multi-syllable wordplay, Pharoahe Monch is considered a hip-hop and musical icon with a career spanning more than 3 decades. During that 30-year journey, he has stayed committed to the culture of lyricism and hip-hop in an ever-changing paradigm that has the music industry pushing to the forefront the low-hanging fruit of disposable artists. Pharoahe is a Grammy Award winner whose consistency and talent as an artist has led him to collaborating with some of the most recognizable names and creatives in hip hop, jazz, and alternative music. We're excited to talk about his incredible career, some highlights, the creative process, maybe a little state of the union, what he's doing now, and a lot more with the one and only Pharoahe Monch. Welcome to the RUN GPG Podcast.
Peace. What a illustrious intro there. Dope.
Yeah, well, it's your bio, my man. It's your bio.
Oh,
and, there is so much I do want to talk to you about today. But to start with, as we always say on the show, we want to paint the picture a little bit and get a brief, pre-Pharoahe biography, which will give us some context for our discussion. So to break the ice, take us back to the beginning. Who is Troy Jamerson, AKA Pharoahe Monch? Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Oh man, I grew up right here in Queens, New York, Jamaica, Queens, New York. Kind of rough side of town, but kind of best of both worlds in that parents were there and encouraging. This was kind of that place was kind of the hub for creativity around organized confusion in the early days of me getting into hip hop. I've always been an artist, went to art school, high school art and design, took up computer graphics and photography and architecture and all these different courses they had in these rotationals that they would have before you would pick your major. So I dabbled a little bit in a lot of the arts and just during that time frame fell in love with hip hop. I was fortunate to fall in love with it at that time because it was still like a cultural revolution in the sense that, it wasn't just cats trying to get signed for record deals. It was just the explosion of the fashion and the dancing aspect and the breaking and the DJs and the graffiti and the whole thing. And so since I was immersed in it from that standpoint, it kind of gave me a respect for all of the elements, which I still hold to this day. It was about finding my voice as an artist and, setting the goals high way back then, which I think I can attribute to longevity, even like digging for records back then, jazz, rock records and breaks from the 70s. It lets you know that there was really good music that stood the test of time. Even then you're going through James Brown and, you're looking at the dates and you're like, man, this stuff is 15, 10, 20 years old and it still resonates. So we're still spinning it or sampling it. It made me think about what a long-term career would look like as opposed to looking at it like a fad or just something to do for a summer or two. So I always had my eyes set on the 25, 30-year long haul and the end game of it all.
Yeah, thanks for breaking that down. It's really interesting when, you talk to creatives, artists, musicians, sometimes they don't actually start, where they are now. They started in some other aspect of it. And, that was my next question, which was, what was your earliest musical influences? Like, I mean, generally people of our age, I grew up with hip hop, but, hip hop when you started it's not like it was around for, decades before that. So, your musical influences, as you mentioned James Brown, some jazz. What are some other musical influences early in your life that you remember distinctly?
I was also kind of lucky because it was all different music flowing throughout the house. You know, my oldest brother, rest in peace, was heavy into classic rock, Deep Purple, Smoke on the Water, all like classic rock stuff as well. And then later went into like classics of Coltrane and Miles. And I was, you know, young, but I was watching all these stages. And that's how, you know, what I was influenced by, Coltrane, but just Black church, gospel vocals, preacher vocals, but also heavy rock vocals and rock breaks as well. So I was immersed in the whole gamut, like the whole thing. And I'm lucky for that as well. There's another reason why I gravitated towards hip hop. Out of all the genres, it's the one that requires you to have, to be a really good DJ, to have knowledge of all these different, you know, genres. Whereas if you become a master in jazz, you really need to study that in and out. Become a master hip hop producer or DJ, you really need to be pretty well-rounded in all of these categories to be a grandmaster or just know your music like that. You think about the early stages, it was a lot of, Billy Squier breaks. A lot of the bands that we were finding breaks from, or DJs was finding breaks from back then, was rock groups. So you needed to dig everywhere and know everything.
Yeah, and I think that influence is coming through on your latest projects, which we'll talk about in a moment here. I think that's evident for sure. So take us back again, like where did your actual journey in hip hop begin? Like, you know, did you start off as an MC and start battle rapping and, you know, like maybe your first record deal? Where did it start for you?
Shit. Like I said, I wanted to be a break dancer. I was too top heavy to get on the floor and do spins. I was like, you suck at that. And then we would play beats and, you know, do our little raps and stuff. And I wrote some raps and laid them down at a friend's house, like in real time with a DJ cutting the record. And I took the tape home and listened to it. You know, my part came up and I was like, yo, you really suck, bro. Like, this is terrible. You know, like in that moment, I felt lucky though to realize that I could hear how bad I was. I thought that was a good thing. But in that moment that I was saying, yo, this is the worst I've ever heard, I also felt blessed to realize it before playing it for anybody else. I was like, you're going to have to work extra hard at this. I mean, those were the early stages, like coming from art background, early hip hop background. We knew that we couldn't sound like anybody else and it would take time to develop what our approach to making records would be. It was gutter, man. It was in the basement, turntables and a tape machine, one microphone, sharing, like, all right, I did my part, let me pass you the microphone type shit. And even in those early stages, because we had to work that way, even when we went to the studio, we would be in the booth at the same time, sometimes to save time and save money. You don't realize how that's exercising and developing skills. You don't have much, you know, finance. So you're like, man, we got 2 hours. You got all the technology and all the tracks. You know, back then we were using like 4 and 8 track recorders and shit like that. So I do think that whipped us and trained us to be better performers, better breath control, and all that. So those were beautiful times.
Any of those old tapes still hanging around anywhere?
Man, definitely got some old demos. Those demos still exist on like cassette tapes, but it turned into what would be our actual demo, in which got in the hands of Bobito Garcia, Stretch Armstrong, who got, you know, Bob had a job at Def Jams and, you know, delivered it to Russell Simmons, who was the first one to hear our demo.
Yeah, in good company. Yeah. Now, you did mention, you know, Queens, where you're from. You're synonymous with hip hop, you know, or hip hop on the East Coast hip hop. And you're a Queens guy, right? And Queens actually has an incredible rap lineage, right? LL Cool J, 50 Cent, Nas. Like, is there such a thing as a Queen style? Is that a thing?
Run DMC, Coogee Rap, Large Professor, Salt and Pepper.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Mobb Deep, MC Sham.
Yeah, what is it about Queens What is it about Queens that has created this incredible ecosystem within New York? And is there a distinct style that comes from Queens?
I think the styles have been all over the place, from technical to street to brag to drug and all of those things. I think very early on in the beginning, we're outside doing the park joints as well, and sound clash and sound systems, even before the MCs came up. I think one thing that pushed Queens is like the South and like California and the Midwest. So we always felt like kind of like a chip to be like, yeah, you know, we got to prove ourselves extra hard. So when, you know, the South went through that without getting their respect from the East Coast and the West Coast, like Queens cats kind of like felt the vibes because, you know, it was always like the unsung borough.
Yeah, interesting discussion for sure. Now, you're known as a true lyricist, right? With an intricate delivery that can really paint a picture, you know, tell a story. So I love this question. I ask it of all the creatives I have on the show. What's your creative process? Like, how do you go about writing? Has it always been the same? And where do you find inspiration?
Oh man, I wish I could shut it off, but my brain is constantly going, it's constantly searching. I'll just come up with a theme and try to script it first. What would this song be about if you was to tackle this subject matter? And I'll leave it there. And sometimes it's like just bars and I'll come up with a funny line or really intricate line. You know, that's my process. Like, it's not like I'm pressed to, you know, knock those type of things out immediately. So my process is, I liken it to film because I'll, you know, sketch out, you know, the script, flesh it out, go back to it, perform it, put my soul and my spirit into it. And if I believe it, then I know I have something there to build upon. Because it encompasses the production and the music side as well. There has to be a marriage. So for me, it usually takes time to get it done. And I'm watching film, I'm reading, I'm having conversations with people that are inspiring. I'm looking for anything that's inspiring. Films, with the last project, it was the Road Warrior joint, Fury Road, that really blew me away in terms of the visuals. I must have watched that like 10 times. And the Joker, in terms of his performance in the film and the commitment to the performance, made me re-examine the commitment to the characters, the voicing or the articulation on the rhyme side. So, you know, like after watching that film, I went back and was like, let me listen again to see if I really believe you. Like if I'm watching someone on camera, like, let me see if I believe this scene. I'll listen back to a song and be like, I believe this guy. Like, yeah.
Yeah, super interesting. Now, maybe this is maybe I'm asking the same question again, but in a different way. We're taking it further. Like I think anybody who knows, you know, the history of your music and your projects, they would say that you're no doubt a deep thinker, maybe an intellectual, but definitely an abstract creative. I would call you an abstract creative for sure. Where does that, you know, that conscious rap, deeper level of the craft come from? Because it's not surface level. You know, you get really cerebral. That's the word I always use for you. Where does that come from?
Sometimes, you know, with art, you walk into the museum and you see a piece and it hits you right away. You relate to it right away, you get it. And that's beautiful. Sometimes you find an interesting piece and you grow with it and it grows with you and it redefines itself as you evolve. So experiencing that myself with books or film, as you try to evolve, you look at something again and you're like, man, you know, this, you know, love meant this to me at 25, meant this to me at 35. Now it has a totally different meaning because I'm experiencing it in a different way. I say that to say, in the approach to making songs, I've always tried to put a little layer in there, a little feeling in there, so that, you know, if you go back to a piece, it has a longer shelf life. It's not just pop culture references, which are, you know, they play out after that moment is over. Mm-hmm. I think a portion of that too is realizing that when you're like a niche artist and you have a boutique thing that you're doing and it's not meant to be mainstream, but I'm fine with like having this Illmatic cupcake spot. It's one of them in Brooklyn, maybe 2 locations. But every time people come from Canada or come from Europe and London to New York, they're like, yo, you got to go to this cupcake spot. You have to go there. How long are you going to be in New York? You got to do it. And then once you know that there's a line, then you take special care of it. So I think that's why I pay that much attention to the product. They're there, and I need to keep taking care of them in order for them to keep coming back to my one cupcake place.
And that is a fascinating breakdown. It's true. I think your fans care more. I mean, they're almost fanatical about your music, and I think really great works of art, they're timeless. I mean, you're pointing that out, right? To follow up on what you just talked about, your bio mentions that your music has stayed committed to the culture of lyricism and hip hop in an ever-changing paradigm that has the music industry pushing to the forefront the low-hanging fruit of disposable artists, right? You kind of talked about that. And again, anyone who's followed your career would say you're as authentic as it gets. You just described that. Can you speak to specifically the low-hanging fruit of disposable artists? Maybe unpack what that means to you. And then the follow-up to that is the importance of authenticity, because I think that's what that really means. How important is authenticity?
I think, there's a need for fast food. Obviously, we in a fast-paced society, you're getting up and you're going and you need to go through a drive-thru. You don't have time to do this. Let me just get some coffee. So I understand the majority of people are not even into music the way that I'm into music. You ask the average person, what's your favorite group? They're like, Coldplay. And you're like, oh yeah, I like Coldplay too. Why you like Coldplay? And they're like, I don't know, colors and sound. They're not breaking this down like an avid fan is going to break down music. So the percentage of people who actually buy into music, especially the way it's disseminated now, is very few. For most people, it's something that's just on in the car when they're going to work, or on when they're dusting or vacuuming. It's like if you ask them to break down why the MC or why the singer is their favorite, they're not going to give you too much detail. So corporate-wise, there is a need to reproduce a certain tempo, keep the ads flowing on the radio. I get it. But for me, that was never me. I could never reproduce, in a corporate setting. Even in art school, I was like, I'm not going to be able to work for this comic book company because I'm not going to be able to sit there and keep reproducing similar things. Like, I need to create. So this generation that's just like gotten higher in terms of like spitting out, reproducing, recycling, kind of the same type of produced music, it really kind of set a precedent in terms of where we are right now with art. There'll always be, new teenagers and new consumers that don't have the experience. And that's what any corporation or company. I'm a sports fan, so new season ticket holders are coming in and younger, and you want to tell your son. And so I get that side of it, knocking it. I understand it. But it's important for me to differentiate that. I do think that though the last 3 projects and even Simon Says and stuff like that was it could play ball in that arena, but corporate doesn't gravitate to the artist's mind because they know the artist is not gonna reproduce that way. A good example is Prince, coming off of Purple Rain. This is it has a movie, it has this is the most amazing, album ever. I'm sure the company was like, okay, Prince, your new album, can we call it Lavender Precipitation? And he's like, the fuck, man? Like, I'm not, that was that. I'm in Brazil recording with Brazilian artists and I'm onto something new. And people pulling their hair out like, artists. So I get, even in that sense, when they see a Pharoahe Monch walk in the room or whatever, it's already like, it's a consummate artist. Like, we can't roll him up into the system and crank out 5 of these, So I always kind of knew what it was going to be from day one.
Yeah. And, I think those that, follow your work and are fans of your work would call you the consummate artist. Have you thought about the role you've played in being a major influence in those that are already considered true lyricists, like, Eminem, Apathy? Here's a quote from Apathy. I'm going to read this. He said, in talking about Pharoahe Monch, he said, "Dude is from the future. He's not normal. He's a savant, a level of effortless perfection that I will never even come close to." What are your thoughts on that? And are you from the future?
So that's a real interesting question. To whereas not too long ago, that question would have been looked at as like, and I think people would be listening to this like, yo, they're getting deep. I don't even think it's that deep of a conversation, in the sense that if you're like getting into yourself and listening to your voice and understanding the spoken word and how we can, with our thinking, impress upon trajectory of where our lives are going with hard work in this moment, you can kind of project things that should be in a certain trajectory. And it's not hard. I write a rhyme about civil war and people are fucking fighting in 2 years. Am I from the future, or am I just kind of forecasting what I see? If we don't make certain choices personally, as well as the society, where the shit is going. And that's all I kind of ever did, is try to be selfless, try to have empathy, to think about what happened 10 years and forecast, which is not difficult. It's not very difficult to do, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, it's like anything, right? Like, just sometimes common sense prevails, right? You just take a look at how divided things are. We can see the path we're going down. We see where it ends up if things don't correct. I mean, it's the same thing. Now, what's interesting about you that some people might not know is you actually have asthma. You're asthmatic, right? And I wanted to ask you about this because I think it's very interesting. How has that affected your career, and what role, you referenced him earlier, does John Coltrane play in that? Huge. I remember my parents telling people who would ask, how long has he had asthma? And they would be like, oh, he's contracted at 13 months. And that 13 would stick in my head back then. So that kind of gives you a insight into that. But for a lung disease that would just is crippling in terms of childhood and playing and all that, as I started to think about what my future was going to be like in terms of, an adult, I was like, yo, you're going to have to find some type of work or use some type of skill that's not physical. As bad as I was back then, I was in and out of the hospital weekly. And so the arts and the drawing skills, and I'm like, yes, I can get paid from my hands and my imagination. This is my way out of the asthma situation. When the music thing came along, it was very instrumental in me becoming who I am, because it hampered my ability to breathe and rap. And so this thing that I had to defeat and be better than, which pushed me to do runs as I'm listening to Coltrane and thinking about his breath control. How could he possibly hold this note or do this run for so long and so complicated? This is what you need to do to defeat this ailment. In fact, if it wasn't for the asthma, I don't think I would be the MC that I am today. I think I would have relied on other things. But it was kind of always like a battle from the beginning against the lung disease. You have to be able to get your breath control, your lung capacity up to do things that somebody without asthma wouldn't even try to do in a run or a bar. And I think that was prevalent very early on, which is why I think a lot of the greats like Apathy
and M took a liking to hearing that I was trying to push that far with it.
That's a fascinating explanation. I appreciate you sharing that because, you know, when you think about someone who struggles with asthma, the last thing you think they would be, you know, you don't think hip hop, you don't think that they're going to become an MC necessarily. So it's a really interesting conversation. I guess, you know, when you discuss it, you're being vulnerable. Would you agree that, you know, being vulnerable as an artist helps you grow?
Absolutely. It's not easy. Even just reflecting back on that, I was like, oh, I feel away right now. You have to be real with your emotions. You know, I'm being honest with you. And you know, even albums to come like post-traumatic stress disorder, it talks about the medication and how that threw me out of whack during, you know, emotionally and mentally. And it's all because of this ailment. And so I don't want to, you know, it's not like I want to be like, oh, let me give the asthma props. You know, it's more like, you know, the thing that was supposed to take you out, you know, got you to where you are. And that's how we're supposed to overcome these issues, you know.
Yeah. Well, we won't give the asthma props. We won't do that. Okay. So moving along here, you know, talking about your current projects, can you tell us about, you know, your latest project in Group 13?
Oh, man. So as you can tell, like even in the very beginning, like I would hear these tempo changes in music, like hardcore, like some rock groups would go from almost like ballad tempo back into some just hard driving. And as soon as I got with Organized Confusion, I was like, how can we do this on the machines? Like everything usually stays the same tempo. Like, how can we bring these vibes? So there are glimpses of it early on, and then there are definitely glimpses of it on Internal Affairs. So it's something that's been, you know, darker, driving, hardcore music has been a go-to for me since the beginning. You know, I knew with this project, I didn't want to bastardize either genre. So I wanted to keep the temperament of hip hop authentic. So, you know, it's the likes of Lee Stone and Knots and Super Ugly, Marco Polo, and E. Jones, as well as myself, all recruited, as well as the band, to produce this record. And keep in mind, it needed to have a hip-hop temperament to it, very heavy lyrical themes, along with, you know, just using the term rock. I realized that I'm from an era where, you know, rock to me and my crew meant something dope. And it's changed, just like hip hop. It's gotten really whack, flimsy, pop, and all over the place throughout the time. So my manager would say to me, you know, be careful when you use rock as a reference to talk about the album, because you have fans of all eras and ages, and they have a different reference when you say this word. They don't think, you know, John Bottom. They don't think, you know, Jimmy Page. They're thinking some whack because rock isn't popping right now. So just don't throw it out there to be cool, because it has a different reference for everybody. For me, you know, like I said, it's in my time frame, it was just so dope. We were rapping over the breaks and like that, and really vibing off of the music. And Metallica, Police, and just going on these journeys where they were taking it. So in order for people to take me seriously, you know, I was like, you need to recruit actual assassins. You need to go back to the basics, go back to the basement, go back to the garage with a drummer and a guitarist, implement these things in there. And in my dreams, the kid Marcus Machado was just coming up and blowing up and tearing it up all over the place. And Daru Jones, same thing. Jack White's drummer, and Slum and Talib, and he's played for everybody, still does. The same with Marcus, well known. And I went to these guys, I was like, yo, let's do this like a group, you know, because I could rap over this feel, but I don't think people really outside the genre take it seriously if we're not a group and a band. And that's what that was about. Like, if you can imagine somebody from the rock side saying, yo, I'm gonna finally do my hip hop album, yo. And everybody on the hip hop side, like, the does he know about hip hop? Like, who's gonna produce it? Like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I imagine on both sides of the coin, this is what people would hear when I was saying that I wanted to come with this theme. Is it going to be authentic? Are you going to really bring it? And I'm just so excited, that everybody did their thing. The album is out and it worked. I don't want to say work to perfection because we're still working on it, but people gravitated to it. The right people gravitated to it. The visuals nominated and won at film festivals. The vinyl is selling out. And it's not like, obviously not like, 500,000 copies and they're having problems with the pressing, but the amount that the distributors pressed up, sold out, had to repress the vinyl. And I think we're just getting started. That's what's exciting about it to me. Like, I'm looking at it like, let's treat this, me and the guys had this conversation. I was like, let's treat this like we're new. Nobody has an ego. Nobody gives shit about us. And we got to go out here and campaign for fans and for people's attention. And since these guys dig so much anyway, because they're raw musicians, they were like, yo, let's go for it.
Yeah, the whole package looks really interesting. Like you mentioned the visuals. I also noticed you did an NFT drop or an NFT release with this one, with the singles. Can you tell us how that came to be and why you decided to do the NFT drops?
One of the first visuals we started with was the animated short Kill, Kill, Kill. I knew that it would take time to, get the animation done. So we started with that first. And then it came out so good, we were like, yo, how about we take these panels and flip it into comic? And, and it just kept going on from there. And then it was like, yo, how about we take these different frames and turn them into an NFT? But we didn't really dive in like I think we should. And I think we're going to re-enter that world.
Yeah, I think it naturally works as an NFT. That's why I asked about. I think it works. I think it's meant to be with that. I think it was very smart to do that.
Thank you.
The significance of the number 13. Is it true that you've always had an obsession with the number 13?
Yeah, it was prevalent. Like I said, my parents was always like 13 months. And I would go in the emergency room and the doctor would be like, how long does he have? 13 months. So I'm like, all right, what's up with this number? Then when I got into junior high school, started getting into sports, and I made my high school team and I wore that number. And then my birthday is Halloween and it's 31. And I just started to be like, what's up with this 3 and this 1? And it just became my number.
Interesting. Okay. So that's where it comes from. I like that. Here's a question, and I want to unpack this a little bit. I've noticed, a sort of dystopian, post-apocalyptic theme to your current music. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Where does that come from?
That comes from my love of sci-fi. And like I said, I was blown away by the Fury Road movie. I think about the future. I think about what the fashion looked like, what would it sound like per se? And it's the same thing, with the comics and the figures. It's like they allow you to, especially during the pandemic and during this writing period, they allow you to escape. And where do you escape to? What do you see when you escape? That's just the themes that I had over the past 10 years, or post-apocalyptic, zombie apocalypse, but how do you overcome those situations, or how do you avoid those situations? Magnificent Day for Exorcism is really simple. Exorcism is a cleansing, a way back to zero, and atonement, and just looking at society and like, how do we really do that? It's going to be hard. How do you reset? Do you even want to reset? Sometimes, with sports, even personally, I'm like, I don't even want to I've been doing it this way for so long, I don't want to change. Or why do we have to change the rules? And, this is the way baseball, football is played. Why do we have to change the rules? And sometimes, especially with we can see what's happening now, and it's new generations and the genie's out of the bottle. And, it's like it doesn't have to be this way. And the people start to ask why you're going to be forced into dealing with the change. So this is the theme of the album.
It's funny. I personally, not, this show's not about me, but personally, like I've always been drawn to kind of a darker imagery, darker themes in music and art and things like that, almost like a gothic feel. And, going through, just your current projects, I'm like, this is almost like a gothic side of hip hop, like a Renaissance kind of darker feel, although it is post-apocalyptic. So that's kind of what I take from it in terms of the imagery. And the imagery is profound. I mean, the animated video, the imagery in it makes you think, like really makes you think, on another level. It was more than just, it was more than just window dressing. It made you think.
Right. The kids, I watch a lot of film, and for me, when you have the protagonist and antagonist, and you start off with kids in the woods, your heart is like, oh no, who are those kids? Where are their parents? Like, you automatically. So as I'm writing the short, I'm like, okay, it's 3 kids. The oldest is a girl. They're in the woods. They're escaping from who knows what the they're escaping from, some dystopian prison. So, with film, you're like, if you don't care about the characters, you have nothing. So in thinking about that, I tried to start off right from the get. You have to care about these kids. Like, you have to be like, where are these kids running? Who's chasing them? The creatures, I don't know where my mind was with that, but I told the animator, I was like, they have beaks. They're 12 feet tall. It's some eyes wide shut meets, I don't even know, shit. And so they capture the kids, and they're there to return them back to where they're from. So you're saying, who are these kids? What time is this? Is this in the future? Is this past? Is this reality? What's happening? So I want you to feel all of those feels. The twist is, once the girl uses her power and takes the creatures out, she realized that they were the victims of their own, situation. They turn into innocent kids. And so she puts the mask on and she turns into them. The theme is, don't become the thing you hate by killing or whatever. But there's a larger theme because we want to flesh it out and continue the series. Because at the end, she walks back towards the camp or the prison or whatever. And basically, I feel like this is like a Trojan horse type of thing. Like, she really knows she's going back there with a purpose, even though she changed. That's the whole thought out process of that. Even in the fight and the mask, I was careful. I didn't want to date the visuals by being like, oh, those sneakers that they have on came out in 2020. Like, I was like, no clothes that has dates. If it's cars, it needs to be so far in the past, because one of the big resounding themes for the project was, let's remove all pretentiousness. Because with the phone and the selfies and the videos and everything we're watching, it's like, this is me, I'm rapping. And I was just like, that frame, I'm tired of that frame. So I'm actually marketing to myself, like, what would make you be like, this is a breath of fresh air? Like, oh, I hear rapping, but I don't know who's actually rapping because these guys have masks on, which I kind of thought would read like, it's not about us, it's about the music. Please listen to the music. It's not about what I'm wearing or the jewelry or the car. Please listen to the music. And I think in time, you can still go back and these visuals won't date themselves because they're not like, oh, that's what everybody was wearing during the summer of 2020 or the fall of 2020 or during the So we were careful not to have that posture and that feel in all of the visuals, which I think allows the viewer to interpret for themselves. And that's when I have the most fun, you're trying to tell me something, but I'm creating my own world in this movie, or I'm reading this book I'm getting what I'm getting from the book. Like, allow people to have some room to do that. You know, it's fun when that happens.
Yeah, and it's exciting to think you're going to continue the story. So that's really interesting. Okay, some wrap up questions in the time we have left. Now, if you didn't become a musician, a hip hop legend, what would you have been?
I would have focused and had to gravitate more to the arts, you know, drawing and illustration. Illustration was my major, and photography was under that, and I took a liking to that, and I still dabble. I still use it. You know, I found the artist for the album cover, everything. You know, when we're shooting, I'll go look at the frames and be like, can we frame this way? Can we do this like this? Can we get this angle wider? You know, I'm sure the directors be like, all right, Mr. You know, 2 cents. But you know, it helped me have a perspective. So I would still be in the arts. I just don't know where specifically. I'd probably be a dabble over here and dabble over there, but definitely the arts, because I was so bad asthmatically, I couldn't even see, like, I couldn't stay consistent with maintaining a certain type of job, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that that's what you would have been if you weren't a hip hop legend, icon, musician. Are you a new real estate agent or thinking about getting a real estate license? If so, you're going to want to ask about the Greater Property Group's Agent Scholarship Program. Why pay for the cost of the course yourself when the Greater Property Group will subsidize the cost for you? Make sure you reach out and get all the details on the Greater Property Group's Agent Scholarship Program. Here's one that'll make you think. If you could have dinner with any 3 people in history, past or present, who would they be and why?
It would definitely, I think, just not thinking about just go. It would be like Malcolm, Martin, and a musician. Let's say Jimmy, right? And the thing that I would beat them over the head with is, like, you always have these people that try to see the greater good and try to make a change. And, you know, these guys were so embedded and impactful. And, like, often when you think about art and art that changes people, and hopefully, you know, that's why you're doing it. You know, we're not going to be here forever. So you want to leave something meaningful, just like, what are the encouraging words for that? And, you know, it seems like a daunted path because things are still bleak. I think about 30 years ago, thinking about now, I honestly didn't think that the temperature of society as a whole globally would be where we are right now. And it is, it fucks me up sometimes because I'm like, man, you know, we're devolving.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's true. I mean, it's kind of sad where we are. You know, some of the, you know, you find less and less people, you know, concerned about, you know, the greater good. You know, you see a lot less of that these days. I think mental health is an issue for a lot of people these days, you know, being isolated from others. You know, it's kind of scary when you think about the next generation too, you know. Anyways, not to get too far down that path, but you know, you brought it up, and I want to end with this question. Now, have you thought about your place in music history? Like, what will be the legacy of Troy Jamerson, aka Pharoahe Monch? What will you be remembered for?
I don't know. That's why I go so hard trying to make memorable shit. But I feel like a good amount of the work has been done. There's a history before Simon Says that is really, 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 you know, on the fandom side and the lyricist side. And then there's, you know, history after that that went to a couple of different places that I think is mentionable and worthy of mention. But I'm right where I want to be, in the sense that, you know, all my heroes were like kind of obscure, you know, but when you bring them up, people like phenomenal work, phenomenal albums. It's funny because I love great song, great chorus, pop song, pop chorus. It's not like I'm anti that. I really think some of the, you know, we're still pushing the album because I really think some of the themes we're getting licensed, and you never know. You get it, you know, one of the songs wind up in an Apple commercial, and we'll be having a different conversation. But yeah, man, Place, just hardworking, thought-provoking, thought a lot about the process and the art. And that's all you can ask for, in my opinion.
Of all the collaborations and people you've worked with, is there any that stand out in particular as like, wow, you know, I'll never forget that?
One of the things was this record, Oh No, I did with Nate Dogg and Mos Def, and just going out to Cali to get the Nate Dogg vocals. Rest in peace to the legendary Nate Dogg. And just working on that record. And then again, in context, if you think about it, at the time we put that record out, it wasn't a lot of East Coast artists working with Nate Dogg. So that took people by surprise that me and Mos did that song with him. And it's one of my favorite songs. He killed it and Mos killed it, and it came out so well. But just like, yeah, man, like being out in LA and Dre's studio and working with all of these other people at the time during that time frame, it sticks out in my head. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Thank you for that. What an honor to have you on the show today, Monch. It was an absolute pleasure. You're a true legend, creative icon. Good to hear your story, get to know your story in a bit more detail. That's for sure. So above and beyond, it's your body of work that speaks for itself, man. That's what people really take away. So appreciate that. And as I said, you know, like to lyricists and people that respect hip hop, or it's a religion for them, you're considered an icon to them. You know, I think that's fascinating, just to think of when you look back and you realize what you've done for a lot of these other like iconic hip hop people. You know, they credit you. I've seen that numerous times, right? You no doubt see it.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. It is. Yeah, I'm grateful for that. Yep.
Thanks, brother.
All right.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, bro.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, peace.